get to introduce Pastor Mark. So Pastor Mark Edworthy is the City Rise Network Director and an adjunct professor at HBU, Houston Baptist University. He holds a Doctor of Philosophy and Applied Theology from Southeastern Baptist Theological Seminary in Wake Forest, North Carolina. He also holds a Doctor of Ministry from Southwestern Baptist Theological Seminary in Fort Worth, Texas. He has authored the book, The Wall That Remains, as well as several other chapters and articles in various books. Pastor Mark is an international speaker and servant of the Lord. He has given the commencement address for the Polish Baptist Theological Seminary. He frequently speaks at the Polish Baptist Union's annual conventions and pastors' conferences. He has spoken at the Alaska Baptist Convention, Evangelism Conference, and many other conferences in our nation. We are especially grateful to have such a renowned servant of the Lord to share his experience and expertise with us today. So please help me welcome Pastor Mark Edworthy.
Wow. Well, great. I appreciate that intro. I taught preaching for many years, and my only rule is that I want to be through talking before you're through listening. And so I would try to keep on point. I was born in Texas, a little town of Caldwell, Texas, near Bryan College Station. My father was a football coach there at the high school. I'm the youngest of three. We moved back to Houston when I was still a baby. I grew up in the city, went to Waltrip High School, went to Houston Baptist University, met my wife the first week of our freshman year back in 1979. 3 years later, married, then went on to seminary. In 1991, we were deployed to Poland. It was still a communist country. We served overseas with the International Mission Board for about 28, 29 years. We took 3 kids with us, adopted 2 Polish kids. And it's a cool place in life now that they're having kids. Grandbaby number 8 was born 3 weeks ago yesterday, and number 9's due in August. And so we just appreciate the Lord's grace in our lives. We returned to the States from the mission field in the last couple of years, and we launched City Rise Network just over a year ago in the midst of the pandemic. And it was like a way to test the Lord. Lord, are you going to do this? And he has been so faithful to bring a network already of 35 partners and growing. And so in my testimony, I often tell people that I was raised in a 2-faith family, Baptist and Texas football. And depending on the day, which had the greater influence on my life. But at the age of 19, I was offered a contract to play semi-professional football. I'd been on church staff since I was 17, so I was already serving on a church staff, and games were on Sunday. And it was the last test to see, am I in the kingdom or am I on the field? And I turned down the contract. But the exciting thing is, fast forward 27, 28 years, and while being a missionary in Poland, I was approached by the general manager of a football team, professional team, and I coached for 2 years. And I say that not to boast. Our accomplishment was we went from really bad to mediocre. So I didn't set any records, but it was just the example of how God uses the way he builds us, the way he puts us together. And going into that role as coach, it was a new sport. The players didn't know the rules, had no instincts. Even worse, the referees didn't know the rules. The fans didn't know. And so I remember one game, we've been working with the fans, even to teach them, how do you cheer at an American football game? And I'm pretty intense when I'm coaching them, but I could hear off in the distance a drum beat and a chant, defense, defense. And I thought, maybe they're going to get this. Until I looked and realized that we had the ball. So we were on offense and our fans were yelling for the defense because they didn't know one from the other. But I use that illustration because as I came back to the States, I see many churches that have kind of wavered from God's standards, God's regulations of what it means to be the body of Christ. And so I want to address that, especially in the topic of relief. And again, some of you may be old enough to remember it started before my birth. I just checked on Google. In the 1950s, a campaign, and the tagline was, how do you spell relief? I'm going to look for a show of hands. Anybody know the answer to the tagline? Okay, most of you guys are younger than I thought. Because the answer was R-O-L-A-I-D-S. It was an ad for Rolaids. Now, that is not how I spell relief when it comes to church work, church partnerships in the greater Houston area. And I also want to be totally transparent. I am not necessarily an expert. We're learning this as we go. I imagine you could come up with 2 or 3 equally good ways to spell relief. But from our 6-8 months here in the greater Houston area, literally in Missouri City, the Lord has been teaching us some ways to have impact that's practical and yet enduring as well. A lot of churches don't do relief because they don't know how. A lot of churches do relief because they simply feel guilty, to be honest. And they don't really have a heart for it, but they feel others are watching. Maybe they have other motivations. I remember when Harvey hit, one pretty prominent church in the city took a lot of bad press because they didn't open their doors. When the ice storm hit a few months ago, they did open their doors. And so you may argue, well, did their heart change or was it all the bad publicity? And I'm not here to judge that church or any church, but just to say it's difficult. Some people like relief because it's a way to look good in the sense of people will applaud you. Even non-believers will applaud you if you help those who are in need. And so I want us to look at the reason behind it, the approach to it, and actually the goal from it. And so these are some of the things that frame the way I spell relief. The first way I put is gospel-centered. Now, again, we planted a new church. It's an old facility, First Baptist, Missouri City, and it closed its doors about 15 years ago. And so through a long set of circumstances, we kind of inherited this building on 5th Street in Missouri City. And so in January, we relaunched or replanted a church. And the 3 non-negotiables I tell everybody about our church is we're gospel-centered. And that seems like a no-brainer, but I've been out of the country almost 30 years, and I've seen many churches that have lost their anchor in the gospel. So the gospel frames all that we do. We're gospel-centered, we're ethnically diverse. Again, obviously, I'm Anglo. I'm not trying to prove anything. We're ethnically diverse because our community is ethnically diverse. And the people inside the building should reflect the people outside the building in the sense of a makeup of diversity. And so the Lord has brought 3 part-time, energetic African-American young men to serve with me on the staff. And they are a thrill to work with. And I'm just trying to keep up with them. And so that, again, is who we are as a church. The third part is we're community focused. And so those 3 things frame all that we do. So we're gospel-centered. That's our lead. We're ethnically diverse. That's simply our makeup. And we're community focused. There's our relevance. Because a lot of people today, they say the church has lost its relevance. And sometimes the church in seeking relevance becomes irrelevant because they've left the gospel. And so part of relevance is actually interacting with the felt needs of your community. Again, as a missionary for 30 years, I met many missionaries who had good ideas, and yet they decided for a community what their needs were. And so they met needs that the people in the community didn't really have, or at least they didn't experience as having. And so we went door to door, 400 homes around our church facility to ask people, if you could have anything at church, what would it be? Now, some of them we couldn't do. So gospel motivated, or gospel is the base of our relief. And what I want to start there is God cares more about the heart than he does about the gift. I heard the story of an elderly saint, a lady that loved the Lord and prayed very loudly on her porch. Her neighbor didn't care for it at all. Atheist, ridiculed her. And she was on the level of poverty and actually ran out of food. And one day she's on the front porch as evening falls, and she's just crying out to the Lord, Lord, send me food, please, please send me food. And she goes to sleep, and this neighbor decides to play a joke on her. So he runs to the store, buys a couple bags of groceries, puts them on the front porch, and watches out the window when she gets up the next morning. When she comes out on her front porch, there are the groceries. And she just exclaims, praise you, Lord. Thank you so much for answering my prayer. And he ran out and he said, wait a minute. He said, no, the Lord didn't answer your prayer. I gave you those groceries. And the lady said, no, I beg to differ. The Lord answered my prayer. He just used the devil to deliver him. And there's the motivation is behind why do we do what we do? What is prompting the relief? I have been in churches where they would love to help the homeless on Monday, but please don't show up to that church on Sunday. And there's this divide, how we, quote, help those people. We just don't want to be too close. And this really has nothing to do necessarily with ethnicity. Sometimes it's as much economics as anything. But what's the motivation? Is it to be seen? Because some people like to be applauded. I believe that's why Jesus said in Matthew, but when you give to the poor, do not let your left hand know what your right hand is doing. That it should be they're anonymous or not blowing your trumpet. There's another place where scripture mentions that in the area of praying. Again, providing food, providing clothing, whatever the need we meet is not the gospel. And we must never confuse those, but it often builds the bridge by which the gospel will be heard. James writes about that. When you see someone sick or cold, don't say, go and be warm and be filled. To the ability that you have, help meet that need. And then they will want to listen, is my experience, to the hope that motivates you, that gospel hope. And so that's how I spell relief. One way is gospel motivated. A second way that we're learning is just through integrity. Do you provide what you promise? I learned a long time ago to under-promise and over-deliver. I'd rather be known as the one who is generously above the minimum that someone expects, instead of the one that barely even meets the qualifications of what you advertise that you're going to do. Again, we were missionaries for 30 years almost overseas, and we'd get with other missionaries and we'd laugh every year about what people would send us. I met some missionaries in Asia that a church in America sent them used tea bags. Okay. Again, you still write a thank you note. You say thank you. Old clothes, I'm thinking my grandmother probably wouldn't have worn this. And again, I'm not making fun of people. I'm just saying sometimes integrity is lacking, that we really don't think of our investment. It's like, if it's easy to give, well, let's give it. If it's something we've outgrown or no longer fits, and again, I'm trying to be kind, but it relates some again to the motivation. One of the overlooked incidences of King David's life, and I love to go back to that chapter. It's the last chapter of 2 Samuel. He's an elderly King David, and actually he makes a mistake. It's a sinful mistake where he counts all of his fighting men. Unfortunately, on one bad day, being a man after God's own heart isn't enough. And so he sends out his generals to say, count. He has over 1 million warriors, and yet it displeases God. And God sends a pestilence, it tells us. And then the prophet Gad, he comes to David and he says, to stop this pestilence, you need to buy this threshing floor from this Jebusite. They were the inhabitants of Jerusalem before it became the city of David. And there's a Jebusite named Araunah who owns this land. And he says, go buy the threshing floor from him, make an altar and make a sacrifice, and then the pestilence will be discontinued. Well, Araunah hears this and he says to the king, King, I'll give it to you. I'll give you the land. I'll give you the wood. I'll give you even the sacrifice. And King David says, I will not offer burnt offerings to the Lord my God, which cost me nothing. There's this investment of life that goes into sacrifices that are worthy of our Lord. And I would say the same with relief. We should lead with our heart. And then if it takes the form of clothing or food or medical or other needs, school supplies, then it becomes more easily given and therefore more easily received by the recipient. And so integrity, really true relief is costly. It costs you time. Sometimes it costs you comfort. And yet I believe that's where it becomes valuable in the expression of that local church. A third way that I would spell relief is dignity. Godly relief, I believe, seeks to maintain the dignity of the recipient. Some people have a lot of difficulty with that there's this sense of giving down, and it ought to be a sense of giving across, that it's brothers and sisters, it's neighbors, it's someone who just may be down at the moment. And again, we strive to do this. One way we discovered is every Thursday we have a food distribution. And I'm so appreciative. Attack Poverty, Second Mile, we partner with these guys. And what we discovered, people came by, about 40 or 50 families on a given Thursday. And some began to come and help us hand out the food. And then at the end of the day, they would put some in their car and drive away. And it was just neat to see that they felt like they could help other people. And of course, we were grateful for them and glad for them to take the food. And in fact, a couple months ago, it hit me one night during my prayer time, we ought to put food out on Sundays. And so we do that. On Sunday, we just set a table out in the foyer, and we just tell people, if you need food this week, grab a bag. If you need to take food to someone, grab a bag. And what we discovered there is some may be hesitant to be seen taking a bag if it was known it was for them. But when you made it broader, then of course people have been taking food, and it's just an easy way to, and it's not really symbolic, it is very practical, but it's a way to say the church is here really not just to pat you on the back, but to give tangible ways, and hopefully that you continue with dignity in that. Relief should reduce distance with our neighbors, not increase it. And so dignity, I see, as a way to celebrate that person and to be practical in helping them. And then the fourth one, and again, you could come up with others. I just put unity. Again, biblical relief, I believe, values the recipient over the gift, that you're seeking to find a unified heart with them. You can relate to them maybe as a father or as a mother or as a grandfather, or we have people in our church who are out of work, and sometimes as they go and help someone else who's out of work, that there's just a connection there that I understand. I've been where you are. Some have recently found work, and yet they still have a heart, obviously, for those who don't. One of our first baptisms several months ago here in our new church was a guy that had been homeless. He'd just moved into an apartment, and he met one of my associate pastors, and he brought him to church. And it was comical when he walked in. My associate pastor is African-American, and so was this brother. And he walked in and he saw me, and he turned to my associate and said, "Is your pastor white?" And the associate said, "Well, yes, he is." And he said, "I've never seen that before." And we got to help him in tangible ways, but more than that, we got to share the gospel. I went to his part-time job one day, and we were able to sit there across the table, and he was so ready to respond to the gospel, had the joy to baptize him. We had a public program one day, and he shared his testimony. He was incarcerated some very difficult times in his past, and yet the Lord has used that in his life to give others kind of a freedom to say, I'm struggling as well. And so we see unity there. Another young man who's presently in a shelter and yet comes occasionally. And we've been able to help him, but also to find ways that he can actually do some odd jobs around the church, which is dignity, the third one, but also which unifies as he's working with some of our volunteers in doing different things, whether it's putting a playground together or some of the kind of manual labor things that we do. Again, unity, what I've discovered is when you have a diverse but unified leadership working together with unified relief, the community becomes unified. We just broke ground last week. An Eagle Scout approached me and said, can I do a project at your church? And I thought, well, I've been to Attack Poverty's community garden. I'm not a gardener, but if you want to build a garden, that'd be great. And so they broke ground and they're about to do that. And we look for ways to go out to our community. There's an apartment complex around the corner, and to say, hey, if you'd like to come tend a garden, you get the vegetables that you grow. And again, I'm glad they get food, but something about standing next to one another and putting in seeds and watering and talking about family and doing these things, I believe, give that unity, the unified sense of community, even more than that meal that may be provided. And so again, how do I spell relief? These would be 4 that came to my mind this week. I did want to take just a brief 3 or 4 minutes, and then whatever time we have, I would love for us to interact. But what is our church doing? We have 7 or 8 kind of practical programs. Some of them I've already alluded to, food distribution. And let me just be very clear here that we do these things in concert. Attack Poverty. Stitch is going to be the highlight here in a few moments. They're one of our dear partners. And but every Thursday we give out food. And then after they get food, they drive around the corner of the church and there's a sign that says, want prayer, oración. It's in English and Spanish. And so about a third to a half of those who come by will pull off and either pray in Spanish or pray in English with our prayer station that's there. We're about to open a free clinic. It's been delayed several times, but Casa El Buen Samaritano already exists over on Hillcroft, and this will be their second, actually a larger clinic will be in our facility here. Free medical care, free dental for anyone without insurance. So again, practical ways. Patients will come in and they'll register. They have to call to make an appointment. Then they'll register. They'll go directly to one of our ministers who will say, how can I pray with you? And they'll have a prayer time together. And if they're open to spiritual counseling, they'll share the gospel with them. If they're not interested, they'll go into the waiting room. We started ESL a couple months ago. About a dozen come to learn English as a second language to help them to find jobs and to help them actually to relate in this community more fully. One of our workers is putting together a GED prep class, and in July we're hoping to begin that. There have been 4 or 5 that have shown interest in going back and getting their high school equivalency. Stitch, again, will be highlighted in a moment, but mental health. With the pandemic, we've just seen actually a pandemic or an epidemic of those who are suffering from isolation in these type things. After school care, tutoring. We had just a taste of it in May, and we'll launch more full force in August, June with E.A. Jones just around the corner. And again, Attack Poverty partners with us to start one of their You Can academies that will meet here in our facility. And then the last one I would mention today, and tomorrow there'll probably be something new, is sports programs. We inherited a facility that has a gym. And so we anticipate a basketball clinic program. Just met with the brother yesterday that's his ministry, and he's putting together kind of a plan for basketball. We have an acre of land in the back to set up soccer fields. And so again, we're trying to impact the community. You may ask, well, maybe your church is bigger than ours. I seriously doubt it. We're running 80 to 90 on a Sunday morning in our English service, 60 to 70 in our Spanish language service. We have an African French language service in the afternoon. Congolese meet in our facility. They don't really partner much with our ministry, but it's a way that we can bless them with an open facility. But what I would say, whatever your size is start where you are. Maybe if you need to start by coming alongside another church or another ministry for your first steps until you get some confidence, I would encourage you to do that. If you're interested in joining City Rise, this really isn't a pitch, but if you are interested, we can help you connect with others who may have a similar ministry or one that would accelerate that what you're doing, maybe someone near to where you serve in a different part of the city. Again, our network is not something you pay to join. It's just a bunch of like-minded people that God has gifted in different ways to try to increase the kingdom footprint across our city. I finished with a quote, flashed up there. Edward Everett Hale, a fairly well-known quote, says, "I'm only one, but I am one. I can't do everything, but I can do something. And the something I ought to do, I can do. And by the grace of God, I will." Then I actually thought I better close with the words of Jesus more than Edward Everett Hale. And so Matthew 25:40 says, "Truly I say to you, to the extent that you did it to one of these brothers of mine, even the least of them, you did it to me." And I believe there is our greatest motivation. So I do appreciate you guys listening. I pray the Lord has given maybe one thought or idea that will help just move your ministry just one step forward to his honor.
Awesome. Thank you so much. That was very enriching. I wrote down a couple of nuggets, and even some of the questions, Pastor Mark, that I had, you addressed them. And so I'm wondering if there are more folks that have questions, comments, want to get some clarity on something Pastor Mark said. Mel, are there any remarks in the chat right now?
Got a couple quotes that we extracted from your presentation, Pastor Mark. There's a lot of appreciation for you sharing.
Mm-hmm. Yes, and if any of you would like to unmute yourselves, now is our discussion time. So just go ahead, feel free to hop right in, or you may leave a comment in the chat box, and Mel just give us a cue for when you want to read those out to us. But Pastor Mark, one of the things that I was going to ask you is, what would you say to small churches that are thinking about all that City Rise is doing and is saying, yeah, City Rise can have a clinic, but we don't have the resources. And you really address that well in terms of like partnering with other organizations, and then also even partnering with other churches. I think that's the beauty of what we do here with our leaders gatherings, is this collaboration. Like, it's all for Jesus. Like, it's not, like you said, it's not a pitch. It's not any of us trying to get, a particular amount of glory from this, but we just want to be used by God. So I'm glad you said that. Anything else for anyone listening that may just feel like, I want to do this, but I wouldn't even know where to start? What would you say?
Yeah, and I'm looking at the questions, and actually the dental clinic, the dental medical is really the only, I would call, high price item. And that was because of gifts that were given. Other than that, for example, when we have a burden to distribute food, we began to look who does this, and Attack Poverty, they do it. And basically we just provide manpower to hand it out, to put it in the cars. We do the follow-up. And so a lot of times there are other ministries God has already called. And even across the street from Stafford High School, we met a ministry there that does creative workings with foster children, with the students from the school. And we try to find out how can we add value to what they're doing. And we're in conversations now. In fact, they're actually coming under the umbrella of Attack Poverty. And so I would say start small and strong. That's actually one of my weaknesses. People often have to pull me back because I'll say yes to 6 different things. And my rule basically is when someone comes and says, hey, here's a new ministry, is to say, will you lead that? Because I have a conviction God gives the leader for the ministry he wants completed at the local church. And so, again, take those small steps. We've had churches larger than ours, actually a couple of churches, probably 3 or 4 times larger, that say, we want to do community impact things. We're not sure what to do. Can we come help you for a season? And we're like, sure, come work alongside of us. And then hopefully maybe through coaching, through different things, that in the next season that they'll be able to launch whatever fits their community as these things fit ours.
Sure. And I love what you said about starting small, starting what you can be consistent at. That's definitely the messaging that we share with our church school partnership leaders, is start with what you can keep going. Like you were talking about earlier about over delivering on what you promised, right? So for sure, I love that. And then also being able to connect with these other organizations to help, and to as a leader yourself, but to empower other leaders in the congregation to take this on is super important. Because I think sometimes when churches hear like all these things, they're like, the leader is like, well, how can I keep managing more and more stuff? But they aren't empowering the congregation to take on the leadership of some of these tasks. So thank you for sharing that. Mel, anything to share out?
Yeah, thank you. I think you really struck a chord with collaboration. I heard that over and over again. And I know that Pastor Jeff and his church, they partner with another church to also serve a school. So another example of great collaboration. 2 questions that came up in the chat. I want to touch on Tawana's first because we've been talking about it. But if there are other churches who would like to partner with you, or maybe sit under you for a season of mentoring, how does that process begin? Do they just contact you?
Yeah, just real quickly, we're kind of building this as we go. There's more story, but I'll just do the quick version. Is we launched this literally a year ago, weren't really sure what we were doing, just trusting the Lord, taking steps. And people started contacting us, and we didn't even have a process to join the network. And then we turned around, we had a conference and had 35 partners show up. And so we started talking about levels of partnership. One is a project level that someone may decide, hey, we just want someone to help with a mobile clinic. And we can help broker that, where someone would come out maybe on a Saturday to a facility and do blood pressure check, glucose, basically sports physicals, these type things that can help a church get into a community in a viable way. But that would be kind of a one-off. Then we have what we call an affiliate. Again, none of these have fees, but an affiliate is someone that has a similar vision, but it would be more like parallel working together. And so you can apply to be an affiliate, and then we would have like a conversation to see how can we add value, and maybe even introduce you to other partners who would have a better impact than exactly what we may be doing. Third level is partner, and that's more hand in hand, like an Attack Poverty, a Stitch, that even they have offices in our facilities sometimes. And then the fourth one we call family. Occasionally, it's very infrequent, and it's not really our goal, but sometimes a church would come to us and say, we want to be a City Rise church. And so literally they disband, come under us, they're renamed and all that. And some people think that's the ultimate, that's really the unusual. The natural is more affiliate or partner. And you can write to me an email, which is simply mark.edworthy@cityrise.org. You can go to our site, cityrise.org, and you can see things there as well, and that will connect you. But I would love to dialogue, whether the Lord leads you into a formal partnership or maybe just introductions. It's all about the kingdom.
Thank you, Pastor Mark. I put your email address in the chat for anyone who wants to reach out to you. I also want to say that I think I saw an email address without the dot, and I read it as marked worthy.
Exactly. Yeah, people think I over spiritualized my name, but actually my parents gave it to me. So
cool. Anyways, a couple other questions. Sherry, one of our district coordinators, asked, how do you provide dental care? Like, what equipment is required? I'm guessing you're partnering with another institution for that as well.
And again, like I said, that was our only high cost initiative. And we have 3 dental chairs. They're state of the art. We have a state of the art sanitizing machine on our board of trustees for CASA, which is a 501c3. It's a separate organization. One of our board of trustees is a dentist. And so he has recruited 3 or 4 other dentists. This is new. Our first clinic didn't have dental work. We have about 30 doctors who volunteer. The dean for the School of Medicine at U of H, Steve Spann, is very well known in the medical community. He comes out twice a month and volunteers his time. So all of our doctors basically are volunteers, and our dentists. And so it's in this facility, it is state of the art because our old facility was kind of having some wear and tear. But yeah, we'd invite you to come visit it, come see it. If your churches have medical professionals who would like to volunteer, we would love to get them in the rotation.
Awesome. Another question from Chelsea. She's asking, what has been your experience in partnering with organizations that are not explicitly faith-based? Any wisdom that you can give as you seek partnerships to benefit schools and the surrounding community? I guess there's 2 questions there. Sorry.
Yeah, very good questions. And again, I learned this overseas. I lived in a communist country for a while. It became a free country after we arrived. And so I remember that difficult balancing act there. But even here, there's some that look with suspicion. You know, why do you want in our school? You're going to do something. And so again, I'm always extremely clear. And I don't bait and switch. I don't obviously want to be dishonest to say we're not going to do something that we get in the school and we do it, because I think you've just broken your testimony there. But there, I'm upfront. I tell them all, our church is gospel. So I tell them just what I told you guys. And part of our community impact is to meet real needs. And then, of course, when we're in the school, we can invite to basketball leagues, to other things that we're doing. But I make it clear who we are, that we're faith-based, but while we're in your school, on your facility, we will abide by these principles. And again, I believe because of that, we have developed a rapport that the school trusts us. I mean, again, we bring snacks to the school. We gave Starbucks gift cards, and because of that, built relational capital. And we're moving forward to even another level of partnership where we may have a ministry center in the school. But even then, we're asking them, what do you want us to do? Provide toiletries for children in the school? Is it food security when they leave to go home that day? Is it clothing? Is it? And so we would do practical things. And again, with invitations to, if it's Upwards basketball, if it's Vacation Bible School like we're having this week. And so, again, so much of my life has been trying to balance that going into non-faith-based entities like government or school. One thing, I never misrepresent myself. And if they put out there, you cannot be a person of faith and have this partnership, I walk away from the partnership. And I haven't had that happen very often, but it is a balance. And some of it's probably personality with some people.
I'm so glad you shared that. Everything that you said is so aligned with our values, Pastor Mark, in terms of having humility when we go into our schools and trusting God, something we've been talking about in our staff meetings, but trusting that God will give the increase, something Purvis has been reminding us about, that when we go in not feeling that, oh, well, we're not doing enough because we're meeting these relief needs and we're not sharing the gospel explicitly, but trusting that as we do this work with humility, like you're saying, honoring the school, honoring the rules there, that God will give the increase from their work. And like you were saying earlier, even with permission, being able to invite them to things that you're hosting at your church because of the relationships that you're building. So I'm really, really glad you touched on that. I appreciate it. Pastor Mark, this was extremely helpful. We praise God for what you're doing. I feel like it's even more encouraging that you guys are a small congregation and are doing this, because it makes this tangible for people. It's not like so far-fetched. And we're happy to continue to work with you as Loving Houston, and we thank you for the service that you guys are providing for the families within your school.